Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to Cheating Stories Best so you don't miss out on new stories. Today, we're diving into a tale that explores monogamous versus open relationships. What's your take on it? Sit back, relax, and enjoy this wild ride. I leaned back in my chair, glancing around the room. It was filled with stunning women, and I couldn't help but wonder, why did Mark Lavalier choose my wife? And why on earth did she say yes? Why did she leave me? Our kids were getting older, more independent, and would soon be out of the house. Linda and I had already discussed what we'd do when we had more time to ourselves. I figured we'd grow closer, spend more time together, maybe even rekindle some of that old magic. But it hit me like a ton of bricks. Linda's plans for the future didn't include me. I felt like a complete idiot. In an instant, my sadness vanished, replaced by pure anger. Everyone at the table could sense something was off. The look on my face must have made it clear that something was about to blow up, me. Dean, looking nervous, asked, "You okay, Jim?" I glanced over his shoulder at a booth across the dance floor where 4 young women were laughing and chatting. Why didn't Mark Lavalier go for one of them? For a moment, I just stared, and then I started laughing. Loudly. Everyone at the table froze, staring at me like I'd lost my mind. I laughed so hard that tears streamed down my face, and people from other tables were starting to look. When the laughter finally stopped, I wiped my face, feeling an odd sense of clarity wash over me. My life had just changed in a massive way. I wasn't in a monogamous relationship anymore. Linda made sure of that. I didn't need to worry about her feelings because clearly, she didn't care about mine. Everyone continued staring at me as I calmly took off my wedding ring, smiled at Dean, and handed it to him. "Give this to Linda when you see her." "I've got things to take care of," I said. I pulled out a $10 bill and tossed it onto the table. "This is for my drink. Since you're so into encouraging Linda's affair, you can cover the rest." With that, I stood up and walked out, ignoring their calls. As I left the club, I started wondering what I'd say if any of them followed me. One thing was certain, if one of the husbands did, I wasn't leaving without breaking someone's nose. Walking through the night, my mind raced. If Linda was going to enjoy herself, so was I. When I reached the hotel, I walked straight to the front desk and asked the woman there if they had any full-size suites available. She said no but mentioned the honeymoon suite was open. It had all the luxuries, private balcony, city views, the works. "I'll take it," I said. She looked at me, a bit surprised, probably thinking I was planning a surprise for my wife. As she handed me the key, I leaned in and said, "If my wife asks for the key to this room, don't give it to her. And please, make sure no one tells her I'm still here." The woman raised an eyebrow, but smiled and agreed. I went back up to our old room, grabbed my clothes, and threw all of Linda's stuff in the trash. It felt cathartic, like a fresh start. I took the elevator up to the top floor, stepped into the suite, and took in the view. The room was massive, with a hot tub on the balcony overlooking the city. I had brought an expensive tuxedo with me for fancy nights out, so I put it on and headed back to the club. On my way, I stopped at an ATM to withdraw some cash, ready for whatever the night had in store. When I got to the club, there was a long line at the entrance, but I wasn't about to wait. I walked up to the doorman with confidence, handed him a crisp $100 bill, and he opened the door without hesitation. As I stepped inside, I saw my former friends still sitting at the table, their faces a mix of shock and confusion. But me. I wasn't thinking about them anymore. My life had taken a sharp turn, and I was ready for the ride. As I stepped into the club, I scanned the room, hoping to spot the same scene I'd seen before, a table near the dance floor with 4 beautiful women, unaccompanied by any men. It looked like a bachelorette party, perfect. I strolled through the club confidently. Dean noticed me as I passed by the table and tried to get my attention, waving and calling out my name. The women at the table glanced over, but I paid them no mind as I made my way across the room, zeroing in on the table with the 4 ladies. "Why are 4 gorgeous women sitting alone?" I asked, flashing a smile. They all grinned, and the tall brunette laughed, her voice louder than the music. "We're here for our friend. Her dumb ex left her for some other woman, and we're here to lift her spirits. She was definitely tipsy." "Well, if you don't mind, I'd love to help out and dance with your friend," I said, turning my attention to a petite redhead. She smiled shyly and extended her hand, letting me help her up from the booth. As we started dancing, I asked, "What's your name?" "Samantha," she said. "Nice to meet you, Samantha. I'm Jim. I gotta ask, how did a guy let such a beautiful woman go?" She laughed softly, a little bitter. "Because he's an idiot." We laughed together as we moved to the music. She told me a little about herself. She was studying to be a nurse and had grown up nearby. The song faded into a slower one, and we kept dancing, closer now. The music wasn't as loud, and she leaned in, asking, "Are you married, Jim?" I sighed. "We broke up." "Was it your wife who danced with Mark Lavalier earlier?" She disappeared after that. Everyone in the club noticed. I gave her a knowing smile. "I think you found out we broke up at the same time I did." Samantha gave me a warm smile, and we danced close until the song ended. It felt good, like we were 2 people who'd both been hurt, just finding comfort in each other. When the music stopped, we went back to her table. Samantha looked at the other girls and said, "I know we agreed, no guys sitting with us, but I want Jim to stay." The brunette, clearly teasing us, said, "I don't know. We said no men. How about I make it up to you by buying a couple of bottles of champagne?" I offered with a grin. The girls exchanged playful glances, but the brunette was still holding firm. "A deal's a deal." Samantha leaned in, speaking softly but with a little fire in her eyes. We all saw Mark Lavalier leave with his wife. Suddenly, all 3 girls shouted in unison, "To hell with him." With that, they scooted around to make room for me and Samantha. Before I could catch all their names, the blonde next to Samantha asked, "Do you and your wife have an open marriage?" "Absolutely not," I replied firmly. Another blonde chimed in, "What did she tell you?" I shrugged. "Nothing. She said she was going to the bathroom and snuck out the back with Mark. And all my so-called friends helped cover for her." Right then, the waitress arrived, and I asked, "Champagne, ladies?" Their eyes lit up. "2 bottles of your finest." The girls cheered as the champagne arrived. We toasted, clinked glasses, and I finally got their names, Kim, Christy, and Susan. After we had a few sips, Christy, the tipsy brunette, looked at me seriously. "What are you going to do about your wife?" I sighed. "I think we broke up the moment she walked out that door." "Do you have kids?" she asked, her expression softening. "Unfortunately, yes. A boy and a girl, 15 and 13. But in a few more years, they'll be off doing their own thing, and then I'll make some changes in my life." Samantha grabbed my arm, grinning. "Well, to hell with that. You're with me tonight." We all raised our glasses, cheering, and the night turned into a swirl of laughter, drinks, and jokes. The girls danced with some guys, sometimes with each other, but Samantha stayed with me, her arm wrapped around me. We just sat, enjoying the evening, letting the drinks take the edge off our recent heartbreaks. Toward the end of the night, Christy suddenly got angry, jumped up from the table, and stormed off. We all turned to see where she was going. It seemed Dean had decided to come over and talk to me, but Christy cut her off before she could make it to our table. My ex-friend, Travis, sat across the room, his face tense as he and Christy exchanged heated words. Though we couldn't hear exactly what was being said, it was clear things were spiraling out of control. Their argument reached a boiling point when Christy, with her voice raised, began jabbing her finger into his chest repeatedly. Dan tried to hold it together, but eventually, he broke down and slumped back into his seat, crying. Christy, not satisfied with just him, unleashed her anger on everyone at their table. The other guests at nearby tables laughed at the spectacle, enjoying the embarrassment that had settled over my former friends. When Christy finally stormed back to our table, Kim and Susan high-fived her like she'd just scored a major victory. With a grin, Christy raised her champagne glass, took a sip, and looked right at me. "None of these idiots are coming near this table for the rest of the night," she declared proudly. I turned to glance back at their table. Jane and Dan were both crying, and the whole group was getting up to leave. Not a single one of them dared to look in our direction. Curious, I leaned in. "What did you say to them, Christy?" Christy smiled, her confidence glowing. "I saw Jane working up the nerve to come over and talk to you, so I let her know exactly what I think about people who support cheaters. She got the message loud and clear." I chuckled. "You sure made an impression. They probably wanted me to forgive Linda so they wouldn't feel so guilty." "For that," I said, leaning closer, "I think I owe you a kiss." Before I could move, Samantha grabbed my face. "Oh no you don't," she teased, then kissed me hard on the lips while the other 3 girls cheered her on. When the kiss finally broke, Samantha grinned sweetly at me, while Kim chimed in with, "Get a room, you two." I laughed, glancing at her. "Well, actually, I do have a suite at a hotel down the block. And, by the looks of it, you ladies aren't in any condition to drive. If we hurry, we can still get champagne up there." After paying the tab, the 4 of us headed toward the hotel, with Samantha clinging to my arm and the other 3 girls hanging onto each other for support. At the reception, I ordered 4 bottles of champagne to be sent to my room. When I casually mentioned that it was a honeymoon suite, all the girls started giggling. As we rode up in the elevator, Kim, Susan, and Christy broke into a slightly off-key rendition of the wedding march. Samantha's face turned beet red, but she only held on to me tighter. When we got to the door of the suite, they started laughing again, joking that I should carry Samantha across the threshold like a proper bride. Samantha looked up at me with her big, beautiful eyes and whispered, "You don't have to if you don't want to." But I was already scooping her up into my arms, pushing open the door, and carrying her inside. As soon as we crossed the threshold, Samantha wrapped her arms around my neck and kissed me deeply. Meanwhile, the other girls found the jacuzzi on the balcony and immediately stripped down to their bras and panties, jumping in without hesitation. Samantha giggled, but kept holding onto my hand, her eyes never leaving mine. Just then, there was a knock on the door. The champagne had arrived. We carried the bottles out to the balcony, where the girls were already settled in the hot tub, giggling and sipping their champagne. Susan, with a cheeky grin, called out, "Jim, you're way overdressed." "You should join us," I laughed, telling them I was keeping Samantha company, but they weren't letting her off the hook either. They teased her about joining them, but she just smiled, pulled me back inside, and led me to the bedroom. As we disappeared into the honeymoon suite, the girls resumed singing the wedding march, this time in between bursts of hysterical laughter. It was a night I knew I'd never forget. The next morning, I woke up with Samantha curled up next to me and 3 other naked women sprawled across the king-sized bed. At some point during the night, they must have all piled into the room after Samantha and I had fallen asleep. I carefully slipped out of bed, trying not to wake them, but Samantha stirred, her sleepy eyes watching me. "Did you have fun last night?" she asked with a mischievous smile. I returned her grin. "Best night of my life. No regrets." Samantha stretched lazily, then reached for me. "Come take a shower with me." I didn't need to be asked twice. She led me into the bathroom, and as soon as the water hit us, I picked her up and pressed her against the wall, her legs wrapping around my waist. It was something I'd never done with Linda, and the intensity of the moment took my breath away. Samantha came twice, her moans echoing through the bathroom. When we finally emerged from the shower, our loud lovemaking had clearly woken the others. They were groaning, hungover but in good spirits, ordering room service and sipping mimosas. Christy smirked at us. "I can't wait to try that shower. You two made it sound like it was the best shower in history." The whole group burst into laughter, and Samantha and I just shared a knowing smile. Once everyone had showered and gathered their things, the girls said their goodbyes. All except Samantha, who lingered, asking softly if I'd mind if she stayed a little longer. As I drove Samantha home, she nestled closer to me, resting her head on my shoulder. "Jim," she began softly, "I know what your wife did was terrible, but you can still go back to her if you want. If you don't, though, I'd love if we could see each other again." She glanced up at me with a hopeful smile, her eyes searching mine for some reassurance. "I'd like that too, Samantha," I said, returning her smile. "Right now, I have no intention of staying with my ex-wife. Tonight was really great, and you're exactly what I need right now." When we reached her house, I walked her to the door, feeling the connection between us. Before she went inside, I kissed her, a brief but meaningful moment that lingered. As the door opened, I caught sight of Christy lounging on the couch, giving me a playful wave as I left. I waved back, but as I walked away, reality began to set in. I realized I had been avoiding making any real decisions about Linda. Returning to the club that night had been a gut reaction to her infidelity. It didn't solve anything, but it did make me feel better, at least for a while. When I got home, I collapsed into a chair in the dark living room. I didn't bother turning on the lights, too lost in thought about how to end this broken marriage without hurting my children more than necessary. Time slipped away, and I wasn't sure how long I'd been sitting there when I heard a car pull into the driveway. The key turned in the lock, and then I heard her voice. "Jim, I'm home," she called out, sounding as casual as ever, like she had just come back from running errands instead of spending the night with another man. She flicked on the light, and there she was, Linda, standing in the doorway, looking exactly the same as she had before she left. The blue dress still clung to her figure, her dark hair flowing down her back just as it had before. Her face, her posture, her smile, it was all the same, as if nothing had changed. It was like the night's betrayal hadn't left a mark on her at all. No shame, no guilt, just the same old Linda. "It's just me, the same as always," she said with a sweet smile, acting like she hadn't just spent the night and morning with another man. Of course, she knew exactly what I was thinking. "Nothing has changed here, Jim. Nothing has changed between us. My love for you is exactly the same as it was yesterday." I wanted to laugh at how absurd it all sounded, but instead, I found myself speaking coldly, "I wish I could say the same." She blinked, clearly surprised by my tone, but I kept going. "Go take a shower," I said, pointing toward the bedroom. She tried to say something, but I kept pointing until she finally turned and went upstairs. After a while, she came back down, freshly showered, but still looking as if nothing had happened. "Jim, where are my clothes from last night?" she asked, her voice innocent. I didn't even look at her. "I think they're still in the hotel room where you left them. You didn't bring them home." Her face tightened, and for a moment, I thought she was going to say something, maybe even try to blame me for not being attentive enough. But she caught herself and stayed silent, realizing how ridiculous that would sound. "Why did you do it, Linda?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. She sighed and looked away. "It was Mark Lavalier. Last night, when he asked me to dance, I felt special. Like the most important girl in the room." Her eyes glazed over, and I could tell she was mentally back in that moment, savoring it. She was still basking in the glow of her night with him, completely disconnected from the conversation we were having. It hit me then, this was it. This was the moment when I knew it was truly over. Linda would always treasure that night with Mark more than any time she spent with me. I had become nothing but an afterthought. "Do you love him?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "No," she said quickly. "I don't love him. It was just about feeling close to someone. I love you, Jim." Her words felt hollow, like they were meant to soothe me but didn't quite reach my heart. "You and I have completely different ideas of what love is," I said, watching her reaction closely. I could see it on her face. She didn't think she'd done anything wrong. To her, I was just being overly sensitive, letting my ego get in the way. She crushed my spirit to feed hers, and she couldn't even see it. "I came back to you because I love you," she insisted. "If Mark had asked you to stay with him, to be his girlfriend or even his wife, would you still be here now?" I asked, my eyes locked on hers. She hesitated. I saw it in her eyes, just for a second, but that hesitation was enough. "Of course not," she finally said. "I love you, Jim." "You hesitated, Linda," I said, shaking my head. "I know what that means. If he had asked you to stay, you would have." She opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. "It's over. Go pack some things for you and the kids and stay with your parents for the week." "But Jim." "No," I said firmly, my voice rising. "The discussion is over. Right now, with the way I'm feeling, nothing good is going to come from this conversation. Go. Now." Linda stood there, stunned, but eventually nodded. Without another word, she went upstairs to pack, and I knew that this time, things wouldn't be the same again. As soon as Linda left with her bag, disappearing from sight, I kicked my plan into action. It all started with a revelation, a moment of clarity that struck me when I saw Linda standing at the doorway in that same blue dress she always wore, looking like she hadn't changed at all. But I knew if I wanted to make it through this, something had to change, and that something was me. I picked up the phone, called my boss, and told him I needed 2 weeks off. No explanations, just 2 weeks to figure things out. Next, I rented a truck and headed to the hardware store. I stocked up on wood, drywall, paint, and a couple of exterior doors. The cashier probably thought I was starting some big renovation project. He wasn't entirely wrong. Once I got home, I wasted no time. I grabbed some scrap materials and dove right in. First up, the front door. I removed it, along with the windows on either side. Then, I cut out a larger space and installed 2 doors, one old and one new. The old door went on the right, where Linda would enter. The new one was mine, on the left. After that, I started framing a wall right down the middle of the house, splitting the entrance in half. This was no longer a home, it was going to be a duplex. I installed a new back door on my side, setting up a kitchen that mirrored the living room layout on both sides. The office? That turned into a 3rd bedroom for me. Meanwhile, the dining room became the 3rd bedroom on Linda's side. By the time I was done, both sides were nearly identical, except for the detached garage that was still on Linda's side. I planned to build a new one on my side eventually. For now, I changed the locks on the garage and reprogrammed the garage door code so only I had access. I even put up a fence, splitting the backyard right down the middle. The transformation was complete. I had turned our house into a duplex. Every day, I called the kids to check in. Linda kept asking to talk, but I wasn't interested in hearing what she had to say. I wasn't in the mood to listen to explanations or apologies. I had bigger things to focus on. A few days later, I called Samantha. Just hearing her voice brought a smile to my face. "I thought you forgot about me," she teased. "I can't stop thinking about you," I replied. "Are you going to ask me out on a date?" I laughed. "Nope." "Stop teasing me," she said with a laugh. "I'm not teasing. I was thinking of something better. How about we go away for the weekend? Just you and me." "Really? Where?" "The Bahamas." Her excitement was immediate. "Are you serious? That sounds amazing. When?" How about we fly out Thursday and come back Tuesday? Yes, yes, yes. Samantha practically squealed. Just tell me what to pack. Nothing much. Just your phone and passport. We'll buy everything else when we get there. After we hung up, I couldn't stop grinning. I started booking the flights and a hotel suite. Sure, a last-minute trip to the Bahamas didn't come cheap, but what did I care? If Linda was going to divorce me, she'd get half of everything anyway. I figured, in a way, she'd be paying for half of this trip with Samantha. Before I left, I made a few financial adjustments. I transferred all the money from our joint savings account into one in my name. I also switched my salary so that it would be deposited into this new account. I didn't think Linda would cancel the credit cards, but I wasn't going to take any chances. I needed access to the money, just in case. For the next week, I worked 16-hour days finishing up the walls and final touches on the duplex. The place still needed some work, but by Wednesday, I had painted and trimmed the center wall that separated Linda's side from mine. Eventually, I'd have to separate the utilities, electricity, gas, water, but for now, I could deal with sharing them. Linda wouldn't be able to turn off anything on my side without losing her own power and water. On Wednesday night, I told Linda to bring the kids home in the morning. Thursday rolled around, and I sat in a chair out front, waiting for them to arrive. When they pulled into the driveway and got out of the car, the look on their faces was priceless. They stood there on the front lawn, mouths open, staring at the house as if they didn't recognize it. Emma was the first to speak. "Dad, what did you do?" she asked, her voice filled with disbelief. I grinned. "I turned the house into a duplex. Don't you like it?" The kids and Linda just stood there, looking at me like I had lost my mind. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. But I wasn't worried. I knew they'd come around. "Don't worry, guys," I said, standing up and gesturing to the house. "I've already finished the right side. Your new rooms are ready, and I've moved all your stuff over." I gave them a quick tour of their new living space, showing them their rooms and the smaller living room. Linda quietly carried the kids' bags inside, still looking shell-shocked. The tour ended with all of us gathered in the living room on my side of the duplex. Tommy spoke up. "But, Dad, this living room is a lot smaller than the old one." I smiled, ruffling his hair. "Don't worry, buddy. You'll get used to it. Besides, it's just temporary." The kids still seemed unsure, but I knew that in time, they'd adjust. This was our new reality, and I was ready to embrace it, on my terms. I had been meaning to make some changes around the house for a while. "I'm planning to build a garage on the other side of the house," I said, glancing at the kids. "And after that, I'm going to install a pool with a jacuzzi." That immediately brought smiles to their faces, and Linda, trying to act casual, told the kids to unpack their bags. She gave me a look like she wanted to talk, but I followed the kids instead, helping them settle in and making sure they had everything they needed. I needed a break from Linda's unspoken tension. Once the kids finished unpacking, I grabbed some sandwiches I had picked up from a local deli, and we sat around the kitchen table for lunch. Emma, my oldest, gave me a curious look. "Dad, what's going on?" she asked, though it was clear she was more interested in how her mom would react. Both Emma and Tommy had spent the last few days with Linda, and they were no fools. They knew something was up, something big that their mom wasn't talking about. I tried to keep it light. "Oh, you know," I said, "your mom and I are just getting ready for the future. You guys are growing up, heading towards your own lives, and we're getting closer to being empty nesters. It's time for a little change, that's all." Tommy shot me a skeptical look. "Gee, Dad, you could have at least talked to us about it first, you know. We live here too." I smiled, trying to diffuse the tension. "Actually, it was your mom's idea. She thought we needed something different, something new. I'm just following her lead. Emma turned to Linda. Mom, why did you make such a big decision without talking to us first? Tommy chimed in, his tone accusing. Yeah, Mom, don't you care what we think? Linda looked taken aback, struggling to come up with a response. It was just a misunderstanding, she stammered, glancing at me for support. Your father must have misunderstood how I felt about everything. I raised my eyebrows, giving Linda a pointed look. Misunderstood? I don't know about that. You were pretty clear about your decision, and once I saw you were committed, I knew there was no turning back. Linda's face fell, and she looked like she was about to cry. Without another word, she stood up and left the room, retreating to the bedroom. Tommy, confused, asked, "What's wrong with Mom?" "Lately, she's been crying about everything." I shrugged. "You should ask her yourselves." I could feel Emma's eyes on me, waiting for an explanation, but before she could press further, I changed the subject. "I have to go out of town for a few days, kids. I'll be back soon, and I'll call you every evening, but I won't be reachable during the day." I kissed the tops of their heads and made my way to the door, my mind already somewhere else. I wondered if they noticed that I hadn't said goodbye to Linda, who was still hiding in the bedroom. I picked Samantha up from her apartment, and we hit the road. The weekend that followed was one of the best I'd had in a long time. We flew first class, stayed at a luxury resort, and were treated like royalty. The sun, sand, and waves washed away all my stress, and Samantha, well, she made sure I knew how much she appreciated being there with me. By the end of it, we were both tanned, relaxed, and closer than ever. I had memorized every inch of her body, every smile, every laugh. When I dropped her off on Tuesday, she kissed me deeply at her door. "Do you want to stay another night with me?" she asked, her voice full of longing. "I'd love to," I replied, "but I've got things to take care of." "You've got classes tomorrow, too. Call me before you go to bed, I want to hear your voice." We shared one last kiss before I drove away, smiling to myself as I headed home. But as I turned onto my street, I saw Linda's car parked in the driveway, a stark reminder of everything I was avoiding. I parked in front of my side of the house, deliberately staying away from Linda's. As I was unpacking, there was a knock on my door. Linda stood there, looking uncertain. "You're back," she said. "Yes, I am," I replied coolly. "What do you want to talk about?" "Can I come in?" she asked. "No," I said firmly. "This is my side of the house, and you're not welcome here. Ever." Linda blinked, clearly shocked by my response. Without saying another word, she turned and walked back to her side of the duplex. I watched her go, realizing that the separation between us had become more than just physical. It was real, and it was permanent. Later, we sat across from each other at her kitchen table. Linda looked at me with tear-filled eyes. "Jim, I love you. I want things to go back to how they were." "It's not going to happen," I said flatly. "Why not?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Because, Linda, in case you haven't noticed, you did something that changed how I feel about you. Forever." "It shouldn't be like this," she whispered, as if saying it could somehow undo everything. "You're right," I said. "Nothing will ever undo what you did, or how I feel about it." "But I love you," she pleaded. I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Let's say we were out on a date with our friends, and you left me to spend the night with another man. If you'd done that on our first date, do you think there would have been a second?" She looked away, biting her lip. "But Jim, it was Mark." "That doesn't change anything, Linda," I said, standing up. "You made your choice, and now, I'm making mine. I don't care who it was. You chose someone else over me," I said firmly, my voice carrying the weight of my frustration. "Jim, I've been trying to tell you, I didn't choose Mark over you," Linda insisted, her voice breaking with desperation. I wasn't having it. So you didn't sneak out the back of the club? You didn't sleep with Mark Lavalier? I shot back. It wasn't just one night. You had a lifetime to show me how much you loved me. The moment someone more famous came along, I became invisible. Does that mean I should keep you away from every famous athlete, actor, or politician? You know there's a marathon this weekend. Are you planning to sleep with the winner too? Her face fell, and she whispered, "This isn't fair." I leaned forward, keeping my voice even and controlled. Now you want me to be fair? You want a chance to minimize your betrayal, to talk me out of my anger? You want to shame me for feeling betrayed, and to accuse me of not putting our family before my own pain? I sighed, shaking my head. It seems like I'm the only one who's expected to be fair in this relationship. I reached across the table and took her hand. For a moment, she smiled, grasping my hand with both of hers. But I wasn't done. I looked deep into her eyes, knowing that what I was about to say would hurt her. She needed to understand where we stood now, how this relationship would evolve from here, if it even could. "It's too late, Linda," I said, my voice low but steady. "Too late." Her eyes widened. "What do you mean, too late?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I've found someone else," I said quietly. She jerked her hands away from mine as though I'd burned her. "Who?" she demanded, her voice shaking with disbelief. "I'm sure Dean and the others told you who I was with that night after you left," I continued. "The redhead I danced with. The one who held me close. The woman who replaced you on the anniversary you threw away." Linda's face crumpled as the weight of my words hit her. Her expression twisted with sadness, and I could tell she was recalling the photos Dean had likely sent her, photos of Samantha and me, slow dancing, looking every bit like lovers. Her anger flared to life. "So, you're doing this to get back at me? Throwing some 24-year-old girl in my face to even the score?" she snapped. "Actually, she's 21, I corrected with a grin. "And I didn't just dance with her. I spent 4 days with her in the Bahamas. You know, that dream vacation you and I always talked about." I paused, watching her reaction. "It was amazing." Linda glared at me, her hands clenching into fists. I could see the fury building behind her eyes, the anger bubbling up inside her. The smirk on my face only fueled her rage. But I didn't care. I was done pretending. This was her mess, not mine. I forced myself to stop smiling, reminding myself of the kids. I didn't want to escalate this, not with them in the picture. But the look in her eyes told me she was about to unload everything she'd been holding back, the guilt, the regret, the accusations. She opened her mouth, finger pointed at me, ready to fire, but then she saw it, the grin creeping back onto my face. She froze. Her hand dropped to the table, and she let out a long, slow breath. She closed her mouth, her shoulders slumping in defeat. We sat there in silence, locked in a stare down. I knew she wanted to scream at me, to tear me apart, to put me in my place for what I'd done. But she didn't have the moral high ground anymore. That leverage she once had, built on love and trust, was gone. She destroyed it, just like she had destroyed us. Finally, the realization settled over her. She'd gambled everything the moment she slept with Mark, thinking she could get away with it. Maybe she believed she was just spending some of the goodwill she'd accumulated over the years of our marriage. But now she knew, she'd put everything on the line, and she'd lost. For a few moments, she stared down at her hands, which were clasped tightly together on the table. Her voice was soft when she finally spoke. "It doesn't matter," she said quietly. "I love you." I shook my head, laughing bitterly. "You still think your love means something special? Why do you think your love matters to me after what you did? Obviously, my love meant nothing to you. So why should I value yours?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't cry. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered. "You already lost me," I replied coldly. I don't understand why you thought you could destroy my trust completely and still expect to keep me. You took me for granted, and now you don't deserve me." I stood up from the table, grabbing my jacket. "I'm going to my place," I said, heading for the door. As I turned to leave, I could feel her eyes on me, filled with regret and confusion. She didn't try to stop me this time. Maybe she finally realized the truth: this wasn't something she could fix with apologies or love. It was too late for that. I had so much to do around the house, but I still promised Linda, "I'll be back in time for dinner with you and the kids. Please, don't bother me until then." As I got up and walked back to my apartment, I could hear Linda crying behind me. It hurt, leaving her like that, but what choice did I have? The pain of walking away was unbearable. A part of me wanted to turn around, hold her like I used to, and tell her everything would be okay. But deep down, I knew there was no going back. The woman I had once called my wife, the Linda I loved, was gone, and she was never coming back. Every interaction from now on would be a painful reminder of what we had lost, of everything she had thrown away so carelessly, without a second thought. Before dinner, I decided to take the kids over to my side of the house to show them some of the changes. I walked them through the new kitchen, pointing out how I planned to knock down the back wall and install a full glass window overlooking the new pool. As they took it all in, I noticed the concerned looks on their faces when they saw the fence dividing the backyard into two halves. They understood now: this side was mine, and the other side would be Linda's. I led them upstairs and showed them their new rooms on my side of the house. Tommy looked puzzled and asked, "Dad, why do I need 2 rooms?" I sighed. "Because this side is going to be my home, and that side will be your mother's." Emma, always the more perceptive of the two, looked at me with wide eyes. "Are you and Mom getting a divorce, Dad?" "She won't tell us anything, no matter how many times we ask." "No," I replied, trying to sound calm. "We're just separated. I don't want to be a weekend dad, so I figured I'd split the house in 2. That way, you guys can live on whichever side you feel like, whenever you want." Before I could explain further, Linda appeared at the front door, calling out that dinner was ready. We ate in awkward silence, the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. Linda seemed on edge, and I could tell the kids had picked up more than I'd expected. Suddenly, Tommy blurted out, "I'm moving in with Dad as soon as he finishes my new room." His voice was too loud, almost defiant. Linda's face paled. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Dad said you two are breaking up," Tommy replied, oblivious to how his words cut through the air. "We're not breaking up," Linda snapped, her eyes wide with panic. "It's just a misunderstanding. We're not done talking about it yet." Emma, who had been sitting quietly up until that moment, suddenly slammed her hand on the table. "Who changed?" she demanded, her voice full of frustration. "I want to know." The room fell silent as Emma and Tommy's eyes darted between me and Linda, waiting for one of us to break the silence. I stared at Linda, and she stared down at her plate. When Linda finally broke into tears, the kids had their answer. I stood up and tried to soothe them. "Your mother's just tired. She needs to rest." I gently helped Linda up from the table and walked her to the bedroom, undressing her like I was caring for a child who'd woken from a nightmare. I kissed her forehead softly before turning off the light and closing the door behind me. In that moment, I realized my feelings for Linda had shifted. She was no longer my partner, no longer my equal. I loved her, sure, but it was the kind of love you feel for someone who has lost their way, someone who has made a terrible mistake and has to live with the consequences. She felt more like an adult child who had committed a crime, sentenced to a life of regret. I would always love her, but she was no longer part of my everyday life. I went to check on Tommy first. He was lying on his bed, texting his friends. "Do you want to talk about it?" I asked, standing in the doorway. He shrugged, barely looking up. No, not really. Next, I went to Emma's room. She was curled up on her bed, her face wet with tears. "Why did she do this, Dad?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why couldn't you forgive her?" I took a deep breath. "You'll have to ask her." "But Emma, sometimes, forgiving someone means losing part of yourself. And I couldn't do that." Emma wiped her tears angrily. "If you forgive her, I'll never be able to forgive myself," she whispered. I hugged her tightly. "We're still a family, sweetheart. I just won't be sleeping in the same room as your mom anymore. That's all." We told each other I love you before I returned to my side of the house. This was our new reality now. The next morning, I left for work before the kids were even awake, so our morning routines didn't change much. Linda and I still split the responsibilities when it came to their school events, sports practices, and activities with friends. We continued to have family dinners whenever possible, though they were always on her side of the house, and the atmosphere was never quite the same. Linda tried to bring up us about once a week, but I always shut her down, telling her I didn't want to talk about it anymore. The biggest change was at school functions. I never stood next to Linda during the kids' events. If she came over to stand by me, I'd make an excuse to leave, usually saying I needed to use the bathroom. When I came back, I'd find somewhere else to stand, and before long, one of the single or divorced women we knew would sidle up to me, asking how things were going. My answer was always the same: we're separated. Over the next few months, I made my side of the house my own. I bought new clothes, new appliances, new kitchen cabinets, and even new furniture. My bachelor pad was shaping up nicely, a giant TV, a state-of-the-art entertainment system, and eventually, a brand new top-of-the-line convertible. Linda saw the changes, of course, but she didn't say much. I think, deep down, she knew she couldn't fix what had already been broken. Linda glanced at me, her face etched with concern as she asked, "Jim, can we really afford all of this? That car must have cost a fortune." I smiled, feeling the weight of the question but prepared for it. "Well, Linda, my old car was 8 years older than yours, and it was time for a new one. You've always bought a new car twice as often as I have, so I figured I could invest some of those missed years into this one. And as for everything else, you didn't expect me to live in a shack, did you?" Her gaze shifted to the new furniture around the house, her eyebrows knitting together in thought. "What about all this? The furniture?" she asked. "I thought I was being considerate by not forcing you to give up any of the pieces you bought to decorate your place," I replied with a slight shrug. "I'd be happy to share, but truthfully, I've never really been drawn to your taste in furniture." Linda raised her eyebrows, clearly surprised. "You've never said anything about it before." "That's because I wanted you to be happy," I explained. "Furniture never mattered much to me." I let that sink in for a moment before continuing. "And don't worry, we're fine financially. The house is paid off, and once the kids move out, my side of the duplex will be too big for me anyway. I'll rent it out for extra income, so money won't be an issue." Linda flashed me one of her signature smiles, the one that usually came right before she wanted something or was buttering me up. She reached out, squeezing my shoulder. "I'm not complaining. I actually like your new car. And you've been working out, looking pretty sharp in those new clothes." "Thanks," I said with a grin. "I can't take all the credit. Tommy and Emma begged me to buy a convertible so they could take it for a spin, and Samantha helped me pick out new clothes and furniture. Turns out, we have very similar tastes." The mention of Samantha wiped the smile off Linda's face. Her hand dropped from my shoulder, and she took a small step back. "Oh. I was just wondering," she mumbled before turning and walking away. I wasn't trying to throw Samantha in her face, but there was no denying that Samantha had become a big part of my life. It was hard not to think about her, and it seemed I was thinking less and less about Linda's feelings as time went on. Samantha had started spending a lot more time at the house, particularly on my side of the duplex. Tommy had already moved into the master bedroom on my side, and Emma, who had mostly stayed on Linda's side, was now hanging out more with Samantha. Samantha had essentially become Emma's cool older sister, and soon, she was spending not just weekends but most weeknights with me too. The only time Linda voiced her disapproval was when I insisted on bringing Samantha to our family dinner for the second time. Linda was polite, but it was clear to everyone that she didn't want this to become a regular occurrence. The tension simmered, and the next day, she caught me as I was leaving for work. "Jim, I appreciate you talking with me, but I really wish you wouldn't bring your girlfriend to our family dinners. This is our time to be together with the kids," Linda said, her voice soft but firm. I paused, turning to face her. "This is great," I replied sarcastically. "In the future, I won't come to dinner unless Samantha is invited. But I'll keep an open invitation for the kids. They're always welcome to join us for dinner on my side with Samantha if they want to." "Jim, that's not fair," she pleaded. "This is the only time we can be together as a family." I raised an eyebrow. "Are we really going to talk about what's fair, Linda?" I asked. "Honestly, Samantha is becoming a big part of my life, and I want her more involved. She gets along great with the kids, and I don't think it's fair to exclude her. If you're going to exclude Samantha, you're excluding me too." "But Jim," Linda started, but I cut her off. "Your version of honesty has always been convenient for you, hasn't it?" I said, my voice cold. "I bet you thought you were being honest when you snuck out the back door to sleep with Mark Lavalier, didn't you? Even though we weren't living together anymore, you still figured you had some leverage over me, that you could manipulate me because of the kids." Linda's face crumpled at my words, but I pressed on. "You threw all sense of honor out the window that night, so let's not talk about what's fair. Fair would be me cooking all the dinners from now on, and you coming over if you want to eat with us. Samantha's a great cook, and she loves doing it." I could see the tears welling up in Linda's eyes as she stood there, struggling to hold herself together. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I shouldn't have brought it up." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The shift in our relationship was clear, and Linda was starting to realize that she no longer had the upper hand. Samantha was part of my life now, and there was no going back. As the days passed, Tommy, in particular, seemed to enjoy the changes. With the pool and hot tub finished, he was always having his friends, Kim, Christy, and Susan, over to hang out by the water. Linda watched from a distance, knowing she had lost control, and for once, she wasn't sure how to get it back. The new pool was a hit, and the girls were determined to have a little fun with Tommy. It was like a friendly competition to see who could make him blush the most. They started by wearing increasingly tight swimsuits, each trying to outdo the other. Christy had a bit of a disadvantage because her larger figure couldn't quite fit into the skimpier suits without risking a wardrobe malfunction. Nevertheless, Christy managed to steal the show by giving Tommy a kiss in the pool and pressing her ample chest against him. Tommy was so flustered that he stayed in the pool for a solid 10 minutes, even though the water was freezing. In the end, Tommy came out as the real winner of their playful contest. He gained a significant boost in confidence, which led him to start dating a girl from school. Once the girls met Tommy's new girlfriend, their flirtatious antics stopped, and they began treating her as if she were the luckiest girl in the world. As for Samantha, she was a wonderful presence in my life. I made it clear to Linda that I wasn't interested in having her complicate things with Samantha. I wanted to keep my relationship with Samantha uncomplicated and separate from the issues with Linda. Unfortunately, a few years later, Samantha graduated from high school, and our relationship started to show signs of strain. I could see it in Samantha's face during Susan's wedding. Our age difference was becoming more apparent, and though it didn't bother me much, it was clear that it weighed heavily on Samantha. Our relationship was fantastic, we had a great time together, and I got along well with her family. We even took vacations together, sometimes including the kids. When Samantha mentioned she was considering moving, I took the opportunity to propose. Samantha appreciated the gesture but explained that she wanted to stick with her family traditions. I wanted to start something new with her, but she never outright said it, yet I could see the conflict in her eyes. I was the right man in many ways but not the right age. Despite my best efforts to show her that her long list of standards was becoming an insurmountable barrier, Samantha seemed to view men like me as a dime a dozen. I tried to point out that Linda had thought the same way, and look where she ended up. Samantha's response was a firm "I would never be so stupid," which sealed our fate. I told Samantha that I understood and that if she ever changed her mind, I'd be there for her. Maybe in the future, when the age difference wasn't as significant, we might meet again. I have no regrets about the time we spent together. At least Samantha had the decency to discuss things honestly rather than sneaking away. As for Linda's friends, my former friends, I ran into them occasionally. They tried to convince me to reconcile with Linda. After their pitches, I'd ask them how they felt about their spouse cheating. From what I'd seen, not only did they seem to accept infidelity, but they even encouraged it. It didn't seem like a coincidence that we had ended up at a club frequented by Mark Lavalier. It felt like karma was playing its hand. A few months later, I heard that the girls had decided to move their girls' night out to a new dance club also known to be a Mark Lavalier hangout. They hadn't mentioned this to their husbands. One of Dave's friends spotted Dean dancing with Mark at the club and noted that Mark had disappeared around the same time the group of women left. Dave's friend didn't see Dean leave with the group, leading to suspicions. The wives initially denied being at the club at all, claiming it was a mistake. A few days later, Dave's friend sent a photo from the club where Mark Lavalier was clearly visible talking to the wives. Eventually, the wives confessed, but they maintained that no one had left with Mark. Their stories were inconsistent, and it wasn't long before the truth came out. However, they refused to name names, trying to protect their friend. When they finally admitted Dean had left with Mark, it was too late. Too many lies had been told, and the trust had been irreparably damaged. When the husbands convened to share their stories about their wives, Dave's closing remarks captured the essence of the evening. He summed up the collective frustration: they covered for each other for a long time. They all lied to us too easily. This wasn't their first girls' night out. How do we know it wasn't just Denise's turn to have fun with Mark Lavalier or anyone else, for that matter? Every husband had seen the way his wife's expression changed when Mark Lavalier approached their table that night. The wives had condoned Linda's behavior, almost as if they were rooting for her, seeing her chance with Mark as a coveted prize. After Linda's first bachelorette party, where she had openly discussed her rendezvous with Mark, the husbands were initially excited, expecting their wives to bring a bit of that newfound stimulation back into the bedroom. But the novelty wore off quickly. A couple of months later, one of the husbands joked about his frustration with the silk sheets on their bed. As it turned out, these weren't just any silk sheets, they were new and white, and there were several pairs in circulation. After comparing notes, it became clear that 4 beds in their social circle had been outfitted with new white silk sheets after Denise's night with Mark. The realization hit hard: their wives were not just reliving the excitement of their own nights with Mark, but the shared experience had become a source of distress for the husbands. The fallout was swift and severe. All 4 couples ended up divorcing within a year. Dave, being the first to divorce, reached out to me personally to apologize. He confessed that his decision to go along with the others that night had contributed to the dissolution of his marriage. Each husband followed suit, offering their apologies and expressing regret. They all believed that had I stood up for myself, perhaps a clearer message would have been sent to their own wives, and their marriages might have survived. As for Mark Lavalier, his cavalier approach to married women eventually caught up with him. Someone took justice into their own hands in a very dramatic fashion. As Mark walked out of the club with his latest conquest, a masked figure tasered him before he could react. While Mark writhed in pain, clutching his groin, the attacker proceeded to crush both of Mark's kneecaps. Despite the incident being captured on video, no one was ever held accountable. There were simply too many husbands with motives and opportunities. Mark's career and mobility were both severely compromised. Linda and I only spoke once after our separation, on the day Emma moved out for college. By then, I had already rented out my part of the house and moved into a condo by the sea. Standing in the driveway, Linda approached me with a look of desperation. "Jim, I still love you," she began, her voice trembling. "I made a terrible mistake, and I've regretted it every single day since. I haven't dated or even looked at another man since then. I know you haven't been in a serious relationship since Samantha, and I'd like you to consider moving back in with me. Let's see how it goes." With that, Linda removed a necklace from around her neck and handed it to me. At the end of the chain hung my wedding ring, the very ring I had given to Dean the night Linda walked out. Her eyes were full of hope as she looked at me. "You still don't understand what went wrong, do you?" I said, my voice calm but firm. "That night, you thought you were testing my love for you, but in reality, it was a test of your love for me. I loved you deeply. You loved the idea of what we once had, the perfect marriage, the perfect husband, the perfect children. You liked that I didn't treat you like property, that we made important decisions together, and that our intimacy, while less frequent, remained intense. You appreciated that I cared about your feelings above all else, that I gave you financial security, and that I trusted you without question. Now, you find yourself loving me more because you realize no one else could make you as happy as I once did." Linda remained frozen, clutching the necklace with a white-knuckled grip. Her face was a mask of desperation and sadness. "You didn't appreciate what you had," I continued. "And now it's gone. I can't be near you anymore." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of lost opportunities and shattered dreams. Linda's face was a portrait of regret, and as she walked away, it was clear that the finality of our situation had set in. "I will never again put you in a position where you can hurt me like that," I said firmly. "I always believed it was us against the world, but you shattered that when you left to be with Mark Lavalier." As I spoke, Linda's eyes welled up with tears. "Please, how many times do I have to say I regret what happened?" she pleaded. "It was never about Mark." "Linda, you thought you were fortunate when Mark Lavalier took you home," I continued, my voice tinged with bitterness. "But you know what? I was the lucky one, too. At my lowest point, while your friends tried to convince me I was a fool for being hurt, I realized something important. It wasn't because of you that we were a wonderful couple, it was because of me." I looked at her, feeling a deep frustration. "You left because my love was so intense, not yours. My love never would have even considered doing what you did. My love was the music to which we danced, which made us special." As I sat there, angered and reflecting on the past, I noticed Samantha across the room. She looked sad, but when she caught my eye, her smile was like a beacon, reminding me of the happiness I could still find. Her smile was a promise of a new beginning, a chance to be happy with someone who appreciated and valued my love and devotion. With a renewed sense of purpose, I climbed into my convertible and drove away with a broad smile on my face. I was eager to get home and start this new chapter. Samantha had recently quit her job out of town and moved in with me. Since then, she has consistently shown me how much she needs me in her life. Trust is a powerful thing, and it's been wonderful to rebuild it with someone who truly understands its value.